So my plan for today, we're going to be getting through an introduction to Agile. And then with whatever time we have left, um, I want to show you how to access, get you information about accessing the PMI materials because that's going to be relevant for homework over the weekend. So that's what we're going to be talking about next week on Tuesday. So before we get started, does anybody have any questions about anything? Just raise your hand if you do have a question to alert me. Otherwise, we'll get started. Okay. So just to kind of preface kind of what we're going to do today, the goal is to share some information about Agile. And the goal here is just to kind of give everyone some kind of a foundation of understanding before we get into those PMI materials. And I do want to start today with a poll, an informal poll. So raise your hand if you've only ever managed traditional predictive projects where you plan it all out and you work the plan. So basically raise your hand if you have not used an Agile approach to perform a project. So just raise your hand, leave it up so I'm able to count them. I'm going to put the hands down. Let's try the inverse. Raise your hand if you have used an Agile approach to performing a project. Okay, I'm going to put the hands down. Now let me ask, raise your hand if you can hear the sound of my voice. Just making sure we got everybody here and engaged as we started. Okay, we'll go ahead and put the hands down. So the percentage of people, oh, do I have to do percentage math in my head? I think we're at 10%, if you consider the entire class. Knowing that there are people that are not here to kind of put that in there. But so, to join in on the poll, but basically very few people in the class, as far as I can tell, have not used Agile on a project. So this is definitely going to be a helpful introduction for everyone, certainly those who have not used an Agile approach before. But the key strength that I bring to this information about Agile is my understanding of how PMI considers the use of an Agile approach on projects, which is relevant to the test. And that's kind of why we're all here. So some of it may feel different than what you've done in the past or what you're doing for Agile projects, but we're going to be, specifically defining and talking about aspects. And again, in the context of how PMI talks about using it in a practical way on projects. It's also a bit colored based on my CSM certification, my Certified Scrum Master, and the class that I went through. It is provided by the one I took is provided by the Scrum Alliance, and there are other Scrum certifications out there, but the CSM is the one that I chose. But generally speaking, this is really focusing on how PMI considers Agile in their materials. So we're going to get started. And I don't expect anybody to walk away today an expert in Agile. It's not the goal, but again, just to kind of lay that foundational understanding. Now, these are just the chapter titles in PMI's Agile Practice Guide, which is one of the key sources for PMI's Agile certifications. It's the Agile Certified Practitioner, or ACP. So PMI's ACP. But of course, it is one of the two publications we're going to be reading to prepare for the PMP exam. Again, this is what we're not going to do today. We are not going to go cover to cover through the Agile Practice Guide. So this isn't something that's going to trace back to that pretty much at all. So the reading was important to get foundational stuff, a start of a familiarity of the information. But unlike the PMBOK where we went cover to cover, here we're not going cover to cover. My goal is to talk about Agile in a more generic way than just following a book. And we're going to start with what I think is just like the most, I don't know, the most obvious question or the first initial question. And that would be, why would we even use an Agile approach? So why would I want to use Agile for a project? And it all comes down to how much we can know about the project. Because when we're performing projects that have fully definable work, there's going to be an expectation that we're just going to plan it all out using understood established methods. However, projects with high levels of uncertainty are going to need to address change and complexity as we're performing them. So the level of uncertainty and complexity on a project related to what we need to do to perform the project, or the things that the outcome of the project or requirements, as well as uncertainty and complexity of technology that we're going to use to create results, those things will likely drive the type of development approach we choose to use on a project. So we can go from a more linear, predictive approach for projects with low uncertainty about requirements and technology, all the way through projects that have maybe a more high level of uncertainty around requirements, or maybe they're just more technologically challenging that will likely require a more adaptive approach. Now we're going to sit on this slide for a minute because before we start talking about Agile, I want to provide a little background as I know it about Agile. So ultimately, back in the Wayback Machine, waterfall. It's that approach to project management. It's been around since the 60s, and for decades it was held as the gold standard for project management. And waterfall really is just a predictive approach of sequential steps to perform any project, and it was really even considered ideal for software development projects for a really long time, which is probably fine in the 60s when things weren't particularly complex. So, waterfall has software development has its own life cycle, the software development life cycle, or SDLC, again, just entirely anecdotal, of analyze, design, build, test, deploy. So we'd use that structure and plan those areas. And then what typically happens, what commonly went on for software development, is we started getting into like the 80s and the 90s, again, when things started to become much more complex. We'd still create the plan using the waterfall approach. I was doing this well into the early 2000s as well for software development. And the plan would be followed, and eventually it would get to a point where the just inevitable emergent needs and changes would spiral off the plan because of its uncertainty and complexity. And what happens whenever any project starts to spiral off the plan? Well, we typically circle the wagons, we get all of our experts, we bring them all together, and we have them work closely together. So now they're not doing work on the project, but they're working closely together to solve the problem, to get back on track. So essentially what's happening is like crisis mode. Something unexpected is happening. It's a crisis. We need to resolve this. So we want to keep them focused on getting through that as quickly as possible. So typically, we'll put them in a room together. Sometimes they call it a war room, whatever. I don't know if they do that anymore. But what am I doing while the team is, heads down together trying to figure out the crisis? I'm sitting in the corner of this room. I'm taking notes about what they're talking about, what they're doing. So if anybody, I'm sitting in the corner next to an open conference call line. And so if anybody pops into that conference call line, like leadership, and they want to know what's going on with the crisis, which is now a big deal, I explain to them what's going on. If the team needs anything, maybe they need another expert to help them work it out, or they're going to tell me about it. I'm going to run off and I'm going to find them a person. Maybe they need anything else that might distract them from the work, like coffee or lunch or dinner. There, I'm your gal. Just tell me what you want. I'm going to go do that, get that for you, so you can just stay focused on solving this problem, solving the crisis. And then as happens with experts, they figure it out, they do whatever they need to do, and then they all go back to what they were originally scheduled to do. So they go back to their originally scheduled programming on the project. And this could happen once on a project. It could happen multiple times on a project, but we'd get to the end and it would end successfully, and everybody'd be like, hey, look how successful the software development lifecycle is and doing software development. Yay. When it really wasn't that predictive structure, that waterfall structure that made it successful. It was actually the crisis mode. So as we got into like the 80s and 90s, there were groups of software developers that were starting to recognize how often this crisis mode just happened or had to happen for them to kind of get to a successful result. So they started asking what I think is the next logical question. It's like, if this is what makes it successful, why don't we just start the project, do the whole project in crisis mode? Have people heads down working together, figuring things out with somebody supporting them kind of on the, out on the outskirts. So we started to see the creation of various frameworks, change-driven frameworks that kind of followed this structure. And they ultimately were able to finally all get together over a weekend. I believe it was actually in 2000, because they wanted to talk about maybe the commonalities with their approaches, share how they're doing things. And what we ultimately got out of that weekend, it starts with the Agile Manifesto. And the Agile Manifesto essentially says that while the items on the right still have value, and these are the things that are the primary focus of predictive projects, but like all projects have these things to some degree. So there's always some value. Like we need to understand processes and tools. We need to create some kind of documentation. For contract negotiation, I want you to think about this in terms of, pinning people down to agreements up front. We need to have some understanding of agreements and following a plan. To some degree, we have all these things in every project, but the Agile Manifesto values the items on the left more. So the right things on the right have value. The stuff on the left has more value. So there's a belief that focusing on motivated individuals and supporting their interaction will ultimately have more value than simply choosing processes and tools. Delivering a working software or result or product regularly through the project has more value than simply sharing documentation about it through the project. Customer collaboration and even continuous customer collaboration, which often comes up, but it's not particularly modeled in their materials. That is going to have more value than simply pinning people down to agreements up front, which doesn't mean that we don't have agreements. We'll have some agreements. And responding to change will have more value than simply following the plan. And they agreed to refer to this generally as Agile because it really reflected, as a term, it reflects the agility, the adaptiveness that was really important to all of their different approaches. They just couldn't agree on how to pronounce it. So is it Agile or is it Agile? And ultimately, I don't think it matters. But it's weird because, like, my sister, also a project manager, huge surprise. She refers to it as Agile, where clearly I just say Agile. And I don't know why. We were raised by the same people. Makes no sense. She also likes to say pivot every now and again. It's like, oh, you're killing my PMP brain. It was further expanded to include the 12 principles behind the Agile Manifesto. And when it comes to principles, I don't really think there's any need to memorize these things, but to understand them, they provide guidance for behavior, as principles do. So there are things to consider while you're using an Agile approach. We're not going to talk about these today. I feel like if you don't understand Agile, trying to put this up in front of you doesn't really make a lot of sense. That's how I felt when I was learning about it. It's like, I don't even understand how Agile works before you start throwing at me how I need to think about it. So eventually, at some point in the program here, not today, but later, I'll probably mention to you, next time you see this, pause. Like if you're watching it on a recording, pause it and read through it. But not until we're done with everything, because I think you still need to get a sense of like how Agile works in a practical way. and that's going to get covered like over the expanse of the course. So at the end, when you're going back through the information again the first time, well, you're doing it again for the first time, or you're doing it on your own for the first time. We're doing the first time through the materials together here. So of all of these, the only one that for whatever reason has stuck in my brain is number 10. Simplicity, the art of maximizing the amount of work not done, is essential, which is, of course, a lean concept. It's about carving out of it, anything that we now see isn't going to create value. Because, like, why would we? I always say, like, why would we spend time on that if it's not going to create any value or time, money, resources, other resources? So, always looking for any way to simplify it, to make it simpler. And that is, guides our behavior. It's something we're always thinking about as we're, assessing things on a project. So while this next statement will contradict what you'll see in the next test you're going to take about Agile, my answer's right and their answer's wrong. I'm just going to say it. And I can demonstrate it if I need to. But Agile is not a methodology to perform a project. It doesn't give you all these step-by-steps and policies and procedures. It doesn't do that. It's also not in and of itself a framework. Technically, the idea of Agile is around using agility to perform a project. So it becomes more of an adjective, or more correctly, a mindset. And it's a mindset informed by the values in the Agile Manifesto and further refined through the 12 principles behind the Agile Manifesto and values, principles. And it's utilized by any number of different practices. Some of them are more formal and more formally understood, like Scrum and XP. But really, any way that an organization is using the Agile mindset to perform a project is considered an Agile approach. So while we will talk about some other frameworks, like these are frameworks. So Agile is not in and of itself a framework. There are frameworks that utilize the mindset. We're going to be mainly focused on Scrum. Bonus slide. Just if you're wondering why you don't have this in your presentation, it's a bonus slide. So I want to talk a little bit more about development approaches and give you kind of a different visual to work with, and then talk about how that relates to an Agile approach. So there are different approaches to doing work. One of those is plan it all out and work the plan. So basically predictive. Something you'd only do if you can predict it. So there's an expectation at the start of the project. We're going to plan what we need to do. Then we're going to do that work in a linear way, and then we're going to deliver it at the end. And the structure of predictive. The other way to do work, pushed it too far at the top. Ways to do work. The other way is iterative, where we figure it out using iterations or iteratively doing the work, like iteratively, repetitively doing the work until we figure it out. So basically, at the start of the project, we start doing stuff and learning and correcting and adjusting until it is finally correct, and we deliver it at the end. So, two ways of doing the work. So, there are also different delivery cadences when deliveries can occur. One of them is single delivery, and that happens at the end of the project. And we're talking about predictive and iterative, there's an expectation that we're doing this work, either planned or figuring it out, and delivering it at the end. So this would be a single delivery at the end of the project. Or we could deliver results incrementally. So when work on a part is done, we'll deliver it in increments, so it's incremental. So the idea is at the start of the project, we're going to plan. The first increment, we're going to do the work. When the work is done, we'll deliver it. Then we'll plan. The next increment, we'll do the work. Then we'll deliver it. And then we'll plan. The next increment, we'll do the work and we'll deliver it until all the work is done and we close the project. So doing the work, delivering results incrementally. Then we have Agile or adaptive, depending on how they're using it. So Agile has aspects of both iterative and incremental. So Agile is kind of iterative and incremental because with Agile projects, they do the work iteratively, but they will deliver results incrementally. And they'll do that at the end of increments they refer to as iterations or sprints, which tend to be used interchangeably, but sometimes there's a specific, like with Scrum, we just say sprint. So the idea is Agile projects don't know the work up front, but it starts with a list of needs that get prioritized to have the needs that are going to create the most value at the top of the list, and we start from the top. At the start of the project, the team is going to batch some things off the top of this list of needs, and I will be giving you all the proper terms today. They will work together iteratively trying to figure out how to satisfy those needs. They'll do that work, and when they're done, they'll deliver it. They'll demonstrate the value they've created. They'll get feedback about it and move into the next iteration. So then they'll batch off the top whatever made it to the top now. They'll iteratively figure out how to satisfy it. Then they'll deliver it, demonstrate it, get feedback, and so on. Added too many needs. We're going all the way here. Until ideally all the needs are met or we ran out of time. Because you can have deadlines on Agile projects, even though we don't know exactly what's going to get done in that time frame. But if you organize your needs to have the things of most value at the top and you start at the top, even if you run out of time, you know you have addressed the most important things. So what this does is it creates these value delivery feedback cycles through the project. Now, the common way that we structure iterations in an Agile project is time boxed. That's primarily what we're going to talk about today. So a time boxed, the team at the beginning of the project determines the team and the stakeholders determine the maximum amount of time they will allow in each sprint. So the trick is they've got to figure out how much can they take off the top of the list of needs that they can figure out and deliver in that time box time frame. Now, technically, if they satisfy the needs before the time box runs out, they'll deliver early. Or if they haven't quite finished it all and there's still stuff that remains, that goes into the next iteration because we will never exceed this maximum time box. Neither of those two situations is optimal. What's optimal is taking on just enough to utilize the entire time box time frame without needing more time, because we have to deliver something of value at the end of each iteration. So we want to make sure that we have something of value to deliver and demonstrate. So that's a little bit about Agile. We're going to move on here. And then there's, did I read that right? Why is it doing lines? Oh, well, not a rule. It just caught my eye. I just read that slide for some reason. It was labeled something different in our previous version. But anywho, ultimately, for every project, there are different styles of leadership. So for your project, you need to determine the style that's going to be most effective for the current team or your group of stakeholders or the situation you're in. Agile projects kind of require a servant leader style of leadership. And using the style of leadership, it's really just focusing on the needs of the team so this team can stay focused on the work. We haven't gotten there yet. So, but we will soon. Okay, so servant leadership is not exclusive to Agile. You can certainly use it in predictive projects. It's just, I feel, kind of necessary for Agile. So some of the things that a servant leader does to support the team include taking on any distractions and barriers to doing the work so the team can focus on the work, also coaching the team to help them form into a cohesive group while creating that environment of trust and collaboration that supports their ability to interact and be productive. So I do want to point out, servant leader is not technically a role. It's not a role. It is a style of leadership that any role can use. Depending on your situation, you can make that decision. So it could be a project manager that is using a servant leader style of leadership and can loosely be referred to as a servant leader. But again, servant leader isn't like a formal role on a project. Any role can be a servant leader. Like a servant leader does these things. If you're using the servant leader style of leadership, but your role is going to be something different, like for us, it's going to be project manager. So it's not technically a role. So there are some Agile frameworks that utilize the Agile mindset. Some of these are called scaled approaches, but these translate to things that make sense to use, enterprise-wide, so at the organization level. Team methods are really the things we would use when we're focusing on performing a project. So for scaled, well, for the team method, we are going to talk about Scrum. We're going to touch on Kanban and XP. For scaled approaches, we'll briefly talk about disciplined Agile. Now, I think to explain the difference between these, the obvious example, here we've got a Scrum of Scrums. That's a scaled approach for the organization, which implies a bunch of these Scrum projects being organized together at the organizational level. So that's why that's a scaled approach. So we are going to, I mentioned before that we're going to focus on Scrum, understand about Scrum. Not because it's the only framework, it's just the most common. I don't know if I can state that with absolute certainty that it's the most common, but it's pretty darn common. Harold, did you have a question? I opened your mic if you wanted to speak your question. I'm going to put your hand down. Put your hand was up. I don't know if you're typing or even talking. Harold, did you have a question?
Sorry, no, my fault. My notebook keeps hitting my space bar, which raises my hand.
Oh, well, take your mouse off the hand. You know what I mean? So when you hit it, it doesn't hit the
Gotcha.
hand. But I talk about being poised and ready to raise your hand, though. I kind of appreciate that.
I'm on it.
Right?
Thank you. Sorry.
No, it's usually like a baby or a cat that does those things that randomly raise hands. But just wanted to make sure there before I started in on another topic. Well, before I started in on this topic. So Scrum's an Agile framework. It uses iterations that they refer to as sprints, and it has some expected roles, artifacts, and events or ceremonies that are expected. And really, the key event or ceremony is the time boxed sprint, which is going to be anywhere from a week long to a month long. depending on ultimately what satisfies your stakeholders, but it can be impacted by maybe the standard length of sprint in your organization or how much feedback you're going to need about the project. So if it's pretty straightforward and you don't need a lot of feedback, you may opt for a longer sprint, maybe 3 or 4 weeks. If you are going to need that regular feedback more often, you're going to want to go with a shorter sprint, like a week or two. But ultimately, your stakeholders need to agree. It needs to satisfy their needs. We can't tell them what it's going to be. They have to work with us to figure out how long that's going to be, like the length of our sprints. So we do have some common roles. Among them, we have the product owner role. And the product owner is usually somebody at a level in the organization that has their finger on the pulse of what creates value for the organization, understanding that the perception of value can change over time. So they always know what's going to create value for the organization. And this is the person that's going to be responsible to create your list of needs that we refer to as a product backlog. So they'll author the needs, they'll prioritize the product backlog, and by articulating the needs, what they're essentially doing is planning the product based on the needs of stakeholders. They also, like I said, they have their finger on what creates value, finger on the pulse of what creates value for the organization, and they'll prioritize the backlog to have the things that are great, the most value at the top. So they're going to be responsible also to make sure that what's happening on the project, what we're doing, and what we're delivering are creating that value. Then we have the development team. And this is a smallish group of key experts across all the necessary areas of the project. For Scrum, we say no more than 10, can be as small as 3. And these are the people that are experts in the work. So they can help estimate the work, they can help decide on the work, they will do the work as a coordinated group. So the team is all about the work. So the team, the work. Just that simple. And then we have the Scrum Master role. And the Scrum Master role is referred to generically as like a process role. This is the role in the project that's going to make sure that everybody is using the Scrum processes correctly. So making sure the team's using the daily Scrum the right way. But also is going to be responsible to coach the team, the product owner, the organization in the best utilization of the Agile mindset. So what I'm going to say here is outside of this framework, put this framework aside, but outside of this framework on a project, we have a project manager. So not within the framework, but outside of the framework, we always have a project manager for every project, regardless of the framework or development approach we decided we're going to use. And a project manager is responsible for, you probably got that already, project management. So we need to make sure that planning's been effective, we'll measure results, we'll create reports, we'll provide communications, we'll manage issues and change and all those things. We're also responsible for, if you remember, integration and creating the right team environment. So the project manager and the Scrum Master are completely different roles. The confusion comes in because people are like, well, who performs those roles? Well, anybody can perform the roles. It could be one person performing both roles or individuals performing one or the other. I could do both. I'm credentialed for both. So in a small organization, I may have to do both. But the responsibilities of each role are distinct and separate. So I always need to know what hat I'm wearing at any given moment if I'm doing both roles. So project manager exists for every project to manage the project. But a Scrum Master is something that we would only include in a Scrum project. And again, could be the same person, but the roles, the responsibilities of the roles are completely different. Any questions? This was like, this was a big thing for me when I was learning about it. I'm like, so, okay, so I'm a project manager. We all knew in the class I was a PMP. And I'm just like, yeah, so how do I fit in this thing? I did not like his answer because this makes so much more sense. Okay, I don't see any hands. So on the first day of the sprint, the product owner and the team come together for a sprint planning meeting where they're going to determine what items off the top of the product backlog the team believes they can deliver in the time box sprint, and they create a sprint backlog. So this is the list of the things they think they can deliver. And every day during the sprint, the team conducts the daily scrum meeting. So it's just a quick little meeting at the start of every day. It's going to go quick so they don't have to sit down to have the meeting. It's kind of a form of a stand up, but not the stand up. And they come together each day to coordinate for the day and then do some brainstorming. So they want to brainstorm any potential problems they see or they've encountered so far and any potential barriers to them doing the work that then the scrum master, typically taking on a servant leader style of leadership, will call additional meetings or take care of those barriers before they would ever impact the team. Also, every day we're measuring progress through the sprint through the use of a burn down chart, and we'll see them a little bit later today. But burn down charts are really just chipping away at what we've done already and just looking at what's left to be done against ideally what should have been left to be done at this point in a burn down. If we're burning down, if we're trying to get down to zero, we're burning it down. On the last day of the sprint, the team delivers the finished work, which can also be referred to as a product increment or just increment. On the first half of the last day, the team brings stakeholders together. They're going to demonstrate the value they've created during that sprint. They're going to get that oh so important feedback about what they've been doing so they can stay on the right track. Last half of the last day is just for the team to come together. And the goal here is continuous improvements. So they're going to talk about their experience in the sprint, like what went well, what didn't go so well, what they can take from that. They're going to analyze those things and make decisions about how they can change things, and not just how they're creating the product, but also how they're interacting as a team. And then what happens the next day is the first day of the next sprint. A question was posted. So a PM manages the project and Scrum Master manages the process of how the project is executed if we're using Scrum, in which case my answer is yes. I think that's, I think that works. Now, any questions? Please do raise your hand if you have a question. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep zipping along here. Okay, I don't see any hands. So, Elizabeth, I can open your line if you want to verbalize your question.
Hi, yes. So when you're doing the sprint review, that's during the week of the sprint, and then the retrospective is the last day of the sprint?
No, all of these, hold on, let me get a different color because this is going to get lost. So all of these things are happening on the last day. So they deliver the result, then they have a meeting to review it with stakeholders to demonstrate it, get the feedback, and then the last half of that last day, they're going to do the sprint retrospective. And then they go home, they have dinner with their family, maybe watch a movie, come back the next day, get a good night's rest, come in the next day, and they start the first day of the next sprint.
Okay.
And when I was taught about this, he was really like, he felt like the best time you're going to spend in that last day is around the retrospective. So give that as much time as you possibly can, because that's where they're going to learn about things. That's when they're going to make decisions about what they can do to be better. And so you want to give them plenty of space to do that. So any other questions? So among our Agile roles, so there's the development team. And so again, this is going to be a smallish group of experts to represent all the different areas of the project. They are expected to be fully dedicated to just this project. They are encouraged to self-manage and self-organize, like figure out who's doing what and keep everybody on track. And they do that as a group. Ideally, it's a mix of generalists and specialists. So I want to talk a little bit about this. Now, generalists have a breadth of knowledge across a number of general areas. So those people are generalists. Then you have specialists. And specialists have a depth of knowledge in a particular specialty. But the thing that we really want are generalizing specialists. And these would be specialists who have a depth of knowledge in a specialty, along with a breadth of knowledge in a number of general areas, so they can better support any area on the project. So they can definitely help out in different areas. These people are said to have T-shaped skills. Ever see that come up? That's what that means. T-shaped. And ideally, you want to find these people with T-shaped skills for your project. But if you can't find them, you can build them. Just have your team spend a lot of time working together and teaching each other what they know. And it just makes everybody more effective. So if you can't find them, you can build them. So the product owner, key thing, they're going to create, maintain the product backlog, make sure it's always focused on value, make sure that, or it's focused on creating the most value and that it's relevant and properly prioritized. Now, the product owner is just one person that makes these decisions. So they're usually, like I said, a high enough level in the organization where they have authority, they have the ability to understand what creates value, so they can always stay focused on that. So they'll write the backlog and own the backlog that talks about the needs. The Scrum Master is responsible to work with the team to help them do the things they're supposed to do, like self-manage and use the Scrum processes appropriately, while also coaching them in the use of the Agile mindset so they can be more effective as a team. And in the same sort of way, Scrum Master is also responsible to work with the product owner and the organization, helping them to better understand and utilize the Agile mindset to maybe embrace Agile more in the organization. So all projects, I think we've already touched on this, but like all projects will go through a series of stages from the start of the project to the completion of the project. And we now see these as focus areas. Some of these, well, all of these have to happen for any project, really, regardless of how we decided to do the project. But the first thing is you get assigned to it and you've got to initiate the project. There is no special way that we initiate a Scrum project, because those projects all have to happen the same way. Like, we first need to have an understanding of what it is we're targeting, and then some high level information about the project, like the objectives. And all these things are driven by what the business realized they needed. So the business need, or the business driver. And these things we can use to start to do the next thing on the project, which is plan the project. Now with Agile, like with predictive projects, there's kind of a flow that you go through, like a logical flow. And it doesn't have to well, some things kind of have to happen in a certain order. Like, you got to plan it before you can build it. But generally speaking, they're applied like how the organization wants to apply them. Agile's even like more flexible than that. Obviously, it's based on flexibility. So there are various components that you can use to plan an Agile project. So what you need is to be able to understand what they are so that you can look at it in the context of your project and make some decisions about which of these things you're going to use to plan your project, like how you're going to structure it. And there are so many variables. But first, we're just going to explain what they are, these different components. Now, at the highest level, we have the product, thing we're building. And then everything beneath that, any work we do, is going to be designed or intending to create that product. So we want everything beneath it to aggregate. Now, to be able to plan, we have various levels. Among them, we have themes. And a theme has direct strategic alignment. So it aligns directly to a strategic goal. And it would be the broadest of all of these. It's got kind of that one focus. Epics can be one of two things. An epic can be either a major deliverable that's going to need to be refined down into components so we can create it. It's going to need some refinement. Or it could be a very complex need that is all, in the same way, is going to need some refinement. Didn't mean to cross that out. Features, basically how it sounds. It's some sort of necessary functionality of the output, what they need it to do. More granular than these, we have user stories. And user stories are basically the needs that go into the product backlog. And they articulate the needs of a particular role of user as it relates to the higher level, like maybe it's part of a feature, or maybe it represents an epic, or it's part of an epic. They are further broken down by the team when the team figures out what they're going to do, what work they're going to do to satisfy that need. So we need to write user stories in a certain way, and there is a structure for doing that that's very common. Of all of these, it's probably the best structured of all of them, in terms of how we write user stories. So when the team figures out together what they're going to do to satisfy that need, they perform the tasks they've planned to satisfy that user story, which may be a part of creating a feature, some sort of functionality, could be part of an epic. However, or a feature that is part of an epic, however it organizes for your project. Now, for tasks, we talk about work. These are kind of the equivalent to activities, like if you're familiar with activities in a predictive project. Tasks are basically the Agile form of activities. While activities we pre-plan in predictive projects, they're going to be figured out in an iteration based on a user story. So to reiterate, themes align to a specific strategic goal. Epics can't get behind that, but the tasks are way too granular. Groups of features or user stories to create a major deliverable or to satisfy a very complex need. Features explain some sort of functionality the users need. So it could be a functionality, capability, characteristic of what we're building based on the needs in the associated user stories. And then user stories can articulate the needs of a particular role of user so that the team can figure out what they need to do to satisfy that need, which will then either create that feature or it will be part of that. See where I'm going with this? Just over and over again. And as I mentioned, the structure of writing user stories is pretty consistent. So it's in this structure to articulate it. So as a description of a role or a user, I want some sort of functionality so that I may receive some sort of benefit, achieve some sort of benefit. And that and acceptance criteria tend to be all you need for a user story. And you could have multiple user stories for like a feature or multiple user stories for an epic, just the purpose why it's an epic, because we needed to break it down to less complex components in user stories. So to kind of talk a little bit about how all these parts fit, we're going to use an example here. And the example is that I have a professional consulting business. And as part of my strategic planning for this year, I've decided to set a goal of increasing my customer base by 50%. And to meet that goal, I've decided I'm going to need, a new customer focused website. And I think we're going to want to do that using an Agile approach. So how that translates. So for the project, at the top, we've got the project, and I'm going to give it a totally fancy name. It's going to be the 2026 customer focused website. I think it's descriptive and everybody knows what we're trying to do. Kind of gives you an idea of the goal. Now, since this project supports my strategic goal, the one strategic goal I have this year, its theme overall is going to be to increase my base by 50%. Remember, themes have direct strategic alignment. It's broader than any of the details we're about to create. So let's say we've made the decision that each menu item, each page in this website is going to be a major deliverable. And we'll focus on them one at a time. So these would be our epics. Let's say one of the pages we want is a more information page. If I looked at somebody and said, hey, make me a more information page, they'd be like, sure. But what do you need it to do? So then we need to sort of break that down because I want some features on this epic or on this more information page. And just one of the features that I'm going to want is an FAQ section on that page. And again, I still can't look at somebody and say, hey, build me an FAQ section. They'd be like, great. What does it need to do? So this is where user stories come in. So let's say we have, and you can have, like I said, multiple user stories for a feature. Let's say one of them is as a potential client, that's my role, or that's their role as a potential client. I want, this is my need. I want to understand the businesses, the offerings and the pricing. Which I think is easy enough to express, I'm going to want these things, but really we need to know the context of that. It's like, why would you even want that? And that can kind of drive where the team decides to go with the work to create that. So that I can predetermine if I want to contact the company. I don't know about you, but I don't want to like call a random place or get involved with or send them a message or anything to a place where I don't even know if I can afford it. So that's something that I would definitely want. So I can make that decision. Am I even going to make the call? Am I even going to send the email or the message? There are other reasons to want to know the offerings and prices, but this is the reason for this need particular. It's context. We also need acceptance criteria so that we can tell that we're done with it, like we've met the need. And that's also a certain structure. So given where we're starting from, so let's say, so we know where to begin this. Given I am on more information page, So this is where we're starting. I know I'm here. This is my assumption, my first assumption. When I need something, so what action am I going to do? So when I enter search criteria of prices, that's really what I want to know. And I do that in the search bar. So this is an action I'm going to take in the search bar. Then what should happen? So in this case, then prices entry in the FAQ section is displayed. So this is how I know the need has been met. Display it. Now you may actually have multiple acceptance criteria for a user story, because sometimes there are multiple things we need to do to satisfy that need, and we just need to make sure that it's going to be usable by this role of user. Elizabeth, did you have a question?
Yes. Who's responsible for creating the theme, the epic, the features, etc.? Is it the whole team, or is it the product owner, or what?
So the team would make decisions, like along with the project manager. We're part of the team. We just have our project management expertise is what we bring to it. The organization chooses the project. They'll likely align it to a strategic goal. And you definitely want to know if your projects do align strategically. That just gives that makes your project important to the organization. So you should understand the theme. And then we start to make some decisions about the results, like what are the needs we got to satisfy, what are our deliverables. That's something we'll typically work with the team on as well to articulate that, and then consider features potentially based on needs, but the product owner writes the user stories, the product backlog. They may have support from the team, but the product owner is responsible to write the user stories that can potentially relate to a feature that may be part of an epic that will align to a theme that's strategic for the project. So no one way to do this. It kind of comes down to how your organization does it, but the end result needs to be can be something like this. There's no must have or must do for Agile, because we have to adapt it. It's adaptive. So any other questions? Still have the entire rest of the second half of the slide deck. So again, your product backlog is the list of the user stories that are expected to create value for the project. And that's going to be based on the needs of the various types of stakeholders. It's going to be regularly refined and reprioritized throughout the project as value, or the perception of value, it might change during the project. So the product backlog is essentially like all of the user stories for the project. And then and they're going to be prioritized, like the high priority or the most valuable things in the backlog are going to be at the top. Then the team determines at the start of an iteration, the start of a sprint, which of these things they believe that they can deliver in that time boxed sprint, which then becomes the sprint backlog. And that's where the team determines what tasks they're going to do to satisfy these user stories, these needs. Now, release planning allows us to structure the project schedule for an Agile project by delivering value in releases. So we typically start out with the product backlog. We can break it up into release backlogs, like what's going to be part of the release. And then based on estimates we create that we're going to talk about in a little bit, we can determine how many sprints are going to be necessary for that release. And once we know that for all of the releases, we can start to answer the question everybody has for you. Now, when do we think it's going to end? Because there is a way to forecast that. And I'm going to show you how to do it at the end. I've added another slide in, but first we have to talk about all the parts. We're going to talk about them here. Sprint planning happens on the first day of the sprint. This is where the team determines, what items off the top of the product backlog they're going to include in the current sprint. So it considers things like the definition of done, which could be just for the overall project or maybe just for the sprint. We're of course going to have to look at the product backlog and any commitments made from retrospectives that things we've learned from past sprints. We also need to understand things about the development team. One of those things is their capacity, which is ultimately how many hours the team actually has to do work in that time box timeframe. When we carve out of it anything where we're not working, like sprint planning and reviews and retrospectives and holidays and weekends, how many hours then are left to do work? Like in the next 2 weeks, what's left? Now, just so you know, sprint planning is also typically time boxed. The rule of thumb is no more than an hour of planning for each week of sprint, because we're not planning all the details. We're just kind of creating some structure. We also need to consider the team's velocity, and this is essentially how efficiently they have been delivering through the project so far. And that will give us an idea of what they can deliver based on their actual results. So we consider all those things holistically and we output a sprint backlog. So these are the user stories the team believes they can deliver in that time boxed sprint. Refinement of the product backlog is the regular review by the product owner with maybe some or all of the team to make sure that the items in the backlog are always up to date and it's always still focused on creating value. So things that have been added to the project, like user stories, will get prioritized in there. Maybe we're starting to see value a little bit differently with these user stories, so things may get moved around. We may have something that is large or complex that we can't deliver in time box iteration, so we're going to need to refine it down to less complex components. So this very large item is technically now an epic. We had to refine down to less complex components, so we could potentially deliver that in a time box time frame. And then, of course, simplicity. The art of maximizing the amount of work not done is essential. So always looking for opportunities to pull out of the project anything that we see now is not going to create value. And again, like, why would we do those things? There's no value to it. So there are ways to create estimates for Agile projects. One common way we do that is through the use of story points. Now, a story point is an arbitrary unit of measure that articulates relative sizing. What I'm going to do here, I'm going to pop forward a slide and then we're going to come on back. So story points, ultimately, they're not about time or money. Story points articulate the difficulty or complexity or even an idea of the level of effort of implementing a user story. We can articulate that estimate using story points. And again, story points articulate relative sizing. Basically, how difficult or complex is this compared to other things that are more or less complex? Like if we talk about we're building a bus, how complex is it? Well, it's going to be relatively, it's more complex than a car, but it's also less complex than a truck. And based on their relative sizing or relative complexity, we can assign an estimate to it. So to be able to do that, we need to determine a sequence of values to articulate the story points. And one of the ways to do that, just pop down back, is through the use of a modified Fibonacci sequence. Now, a Fibonacci sequence is something that plays out in nature, and it's in many Tom Hanks movies, apparently. But this one's going to be modified. So the premise is that when we talk about a sequence of numbers, we take the prior two numbers in the sequence to create the next number in the sequence. So 0 and 1 is 1, 1 and 1 is 2, 1 and 2 is 3, 2 and 3 is 5, 3 and 5 is 8, 5 and 8 is 13. And in reality, that just continues on in perpetuity. But since it's a modified Fibonacci, we're going to stop here at 13, and we're going to remove from it anything that is redundant or unnecessary. So now what we have is our sequence of values in a modified Fibonacci. So when we're doing relative sizing, we're kind of subjectively considering this thing that we need to do. Is this the most complex thing we'll ever do on this project? And if so, it's getting a 13. Now, maybe it's not the most complex thing, but it's still pretty complex. Maybe we'll go with something like an 8. So it can't be a 13 because it's not the most complex, but it's almost the most complex, so it gets an 8. So you got a sense of that. Or maybe it's just so straightforward, we're just going to give it a 1. So it's going to be the easiest thing we can do. Or maybe it's not the easiest thing, but it's pretty close, so we'll give it a 2. So if your organization provides guidelines for doing this estimation, because again, this is just subjective, it's basically an opinion of relative sizing. There technically is not math at this point. So if they give you guidelines for how to assess those things, then your estimators are going to be, subjectively evaluating them in a consistent way. Because you can't be accurate, the subjective is never accurate. You want to at least be consistent with how you're applying it. There are different techniques we can use to assign estimates to our user stories. One of these things is planning poker. Now, planning poker is when all the participants get a deck of cards that represent a unit of measure. We're going to say story points, and it utilizes a sequence of values. We'll just say modified Fibonacci. So the team, the estimators, they discuss the user story. They do a 1, 2, 3. Everybody pulls a card. If they all pull the same card, that's the estimate. So if they pull different cards, then we have the person who pulled the smallest card explain why they thought it was so straightforward. We have the person who pulled the largest card explain why they thought it was so complex. Because people have different experiences, they have different opinions, different skill sets. So we want to tap into all of that. So we do that discussion, and then we do it again, 1, 2, 3, and we all pull cards. And we'll continue to do that, like discuss it and draw again until we reach consensus about the estimate, which is, it feels weird. Like, why don't we just, assign numbers? But this makes it a game, and games are fun. So they're more engaging, they're more entertaining, and things that are engaging are definitely going to be more efficient. So it may feel like a lot of overhead, but it's going to make things go faster. And it's really only useful if we're dealing with like a small group or a smaller number of user stories. But if we've got more, like a large group of people or a large number of user stories, what we can do instead is bucket theory. So here we're going to discuss a user story, and then we're going to make a decision on what bucket we're going to drop it in, based on whatever your sequence of values is. So in this case, what we're doing is we're aligning user stories to a bucket value as opposed to applying a value to every user story, which is of course going to be more labor intensive. So this is just something that's going to go a little faster. Carl, did you have a question?
Yes, on my side, the screen is very small. Is that supposed to be like that, or is everybody else's screen is the same? I could barely see it.
So the text is the exact same size we've been using.
It kind of went down on my side. It was pretty
Check your
big.
Zoom. Check your Zoom. I'm not seeing it being different on my preview. Yeah, this happens every now and again, but it's a Zoom thing on your side. You just need to zoom out or zoom in. You need to zoom in. You've officially zoomed out.
Yeah, it's very small because I wasn't even touching the screen. It just happened to do that at the last slide.
I just believe computers do weird things.
Okay. Well, I
For
was
no
trying to
reason
stay.
at all. Or maybe a pen hit it or something. Yeah, I don't think y'all have experienced the weird things that happen with my computers. Just crazy things. But yeah, check your Zoom.
Okay.
It's not on this side. And other people are saying they're fine. So I'm confident it's on your
Okay.
side.
Okay, cool.
Okay. So another way to articulate relative sizing is through the use of t-shirt sizes. And this to me is just a more conceptually simplified way to do this. And we're talking about relative sizing in terms of t-shirt sizes, like extra small, small, medium, large, extra large. I'm going all the way to double XL here, but it's treated in the same way. And this just shows that, just kind of reinforces this is a subjective measure. It's only ever subjective. When you're talking about the modified Fibonacci, it feels like there's something objective, some math we've done, but it's not about math. This just kind of reinforces the fact that it's just subjective. And it works the same way. If this is the most complex thing that we're going to have to do, we're going to give it the biggest t-shirt size, double XL. And maybe it's not that complex. Maybe it's close to that, but it's not as complex. Maybe it gets an extra large. Same, works conceptually the same way. And what's handy with this is then later you can swap it out for your modified Fibonacci to be able to do math, which is something I'm going to show you on the final slide. We just got to get there. So it just makes it easier to talk about relative sizing when we're talking about something that isn't quite a realistic, because anyway, let me know if you don't get it. Now, dot voting, we are going to see again. We'll see planning poker again too, because this is used for a number of different purposes, like, actual voting. However, with dot voting, individual user stories get displayed. So it could be done virtually or like actually on a wall. And then each participant gets sticky dots that they can apply to the user stories based on their opinion of the size of the effort expected for each user story. And then the ones with the greater number of dots would be the larger efforts. Among our ceremonies that aren't about planning, there's the daily scrum. And like I said, it's just a few minutes at the start of each day. It's a form of a stand up because you don't have to sit down and have the conversation. And I feel like people move fast, like they think faster on their feet. You can get meetings done faster. And all they're doing is coordinating for the day. Like, what did we get done from yesterday? Who's doing what today? Can anybody think of any blockers or problems that the scrum master is then going to take on and call additional meetings or take care of them so they never impact the team? And I've heard it said that if you are not doing the daily scrum every day, you're not using scrum. Can't call it scrum. First half of the last day, we bring our stakeholders together. The team demonstrates the value they've created. We get feedback from our stakeholders about how they feel about what we've done, what the team has done. Final half of that last day, we do that retrospective where the team determines, what went well, what didn't go so well, what can they learn from that, how do they take that forward, what kind of actions can they do to take that forward into the rest of the project. And it's not just focused on the work that's been done, it also considers the team dynamic. How do we improve our ability to work effectively together? So it does allow the team to take advantage of the benefits of continuous improvements throughout the project. And doing retrospectives really promotes transparency and ownership because we're talking about who did what, and it does, in terms of what happened during the sprint. And it allows the team to celebrate their regular achievements. And when people feel valued, when they feel good about what they're doing, they're more engaged. Information radiators are simply visuals that radiate information. Among them, we have task boards, which colloquially, can't say that word, can be referred to as Kanban boards, but I am going to show you an actual for reals Kanban board in a little bit, which in my opinion should be the only way we use it. But how you're going to see it on the test, how you're going to see it out in the world, these two terms are generally used interchangeably. So if they're using it on the test, you need to recognize the context in which they're using it. Are they talking about Kanban at all? If not, they're just saying Kanban board for task board. All a task board needs to have to be useful is a column for the backlog or the queue of work, the to-do list, whatever you want to call it. As work gets started from that queue, it moves to work in progress. So now we have accountability, we have transparency. These are the people doing these things right now. And when it's completed, we move them to done. Now, in a project that is finite, and we know eventually it's going to end, you can just glance at this and kind of get a sense of where you're at in the project. Because if you've got more stuff happening on this side of the task board, you're past halfway. If, however, you've got more happening on this side of your task board, you're not yet halfway done. So visually shows us progress as well. Dashboards are visual ways to summarize across a bunch of different aspects of the project in a highly visually consumable way. And there are tons of these things, like a gazillion. I'm just going to say, if you like, just go out and search on digital dashboards. I'm sorry, I have to cough. Sorry, I do not have my warm beverage for class today. I'm trying to stay away from my warm beverage, but it's drying me out. Okay, so digital dashboards typically have some sort of like extra sheet or something where you put in all of your data, and then it's going to generate it based on, what items you want in the dashboard and what data you have will visually show kind of where it's at. So everybody, and then we typically just display it, and then everybody can quickly see where we're at on different aspects of the project. So tons of them out there. I mean, you could go count them all, but there is in fact a gazillion. Then we have burn charts. A burn down chart is where we start out with, these are all the things we decided we can do in this time frame. And then at the end, it would be done. And that green line is just ideal line from A to B. Then at the end of each, whatever our increments are, at the end, we're just going to look at, okay, so at this point, how much do we have left to be done? What's left of this list of things to do? So we can compare it up against the ideal line. And the goal is not to hit the ideal line. We just use that to be able to kind of articulate or see how we're progressing through the project. And since we're chipping away at the work, trying to get down to zero, it's a burn down chart. That's kind of what we talked about with Agile. I tend to see these more with Agile. Or there's an approach where we accumulate what we've been doing through the project to compare against an ideal line. So, at the beginning of the project, nothing is done. At the end of the project, everything's done. It's ideal. And then we got an ideal line, straight line from A to B. And then we're going to accumulate what we actually did get done by that time frame, and we'll compare it up against the ideal line to be able to explain how we're progressing, just comparing it. And since we're accumulating things, it is a burn up. Now, velocity is ultimately how many story points the team's been completing in time-boxed iterations. So it's only relevant to time-boxed iterations. We start out a project to be able to, so we're able to forecast when we think it's going to end. We start a project using expected velocity. And expected velocity is just, it's a team guesstimate, based on, there, that makes more sense. Get to it. It's based on what the team knows about the project, what they understand about the people on the team, how many story points they believe as a group they can deliver in each time-boxed iteration or sprint. Then during the project, at the end of each iteration, we'll calculate current velocity. So current velocity is, on average, how many story points the team has actually been delivering. So the average number of story points across the iterations. That is our current velocity. And that's more realistic because it's based on what they've actually been able to do in this environment, and on the project. So things that we can use to better understand and forecast when we think it's going to end. Now, there are other frameworks that utilize the Agile mindset. Among them, we have disciplined Agile. And remember, this is a scaled approach. So this is in the organization. I think it's organization-wide. I always say enterprise-wide, but it's an organizational tool. And what it does is it combines elements from other Agile methods. which covers multiple areas of solution delivery. And it can help a team to adapt their practices to align to their specific project's needs. They refer to it as a toolkit, which I think is a great example, like a great analogy for disciplined agile. Like, for example, I actually have a tool bag in my office, and I have it, and it's got like all the goods in there. My dad keeps giving me tools to fill it, but it's pretty comprehensive. And I have it because even though I'm next to it, my husband tells me he's got tons of tools out in the garage and they're easy to find by only him. Like, I cannot find anything in that garage. He's like, go get a wrench. I'm like, it's like, sure. But anyway, so I just go to my tool bag and I pull out a wrench. Or if I need to nail a hole in the wall, I'm going to go for the tool that's going to help me to do that. And I'm going to go grab my hammer. And I want that tool bag because now is the only time I'm going to be motivated to put this nail in the wall. So it has to be easily accessible. If I have to go out into the garage, it's never getting done. So I grab the tool out of the toolkit, out of my tool bag, because that is the thing I need for the thing I'm encountering right now. And Disciplined Agile kind of works that same way. And just ironically, I actually don't have a hammer in my tool bag because apparently somebody took it into the garage, never to be seen again. I know, right? And then there's extreme programming, also known as XP, which is software programming that is apparently extreme. And it also uses a time-boxed structure, so time-boxed iterations. So initially, the team decides what they think they can deliver in the time box time frame. So they plan that out, they design it, they code it, they test it. If it passes test, that feature or whatever they just created gets launched, and now everybody benefits. Everybody can use it. If it fails test, it goes back into the mix, gets reconsidered. So the goal here is really to, through the project, periodically through the project, launch different features or functions that are a benefit to the software and to the people that use the software. So that's extreme programming, or XP. And finally, we have Kanban. So Kanban is actually a lean method for doing work and managing work. It is the most efficient use of resources of any of the frameworks, because it only uses resources when those resources are available to do work and only when there's actual demand for the work. So with Kanban, it uses a task board. It refers to as a Kanban board, the task board for Kanban, which at a minimum, and of course you're going to have any columns that your organization requires, at a minimum, it's got the backlog or the queue of work. So let's just say, let me give you an example. Let's say we're working in manufacturing, because Kanban is very common in manufacturing. So we've got people placing orders regularly over time, continuously, right? And they're getting added to the queue of work. So I got a list of orders. As a resource becomes available, they're going to grab the top order off the thing that made its way to the top of the list. They'll move that ticket into in progress. And then when it's completed, they'll move it to done. And then they will go grab the next ticket that has now made its way to the top of the list. And so they're only going to be working, it's like, we're not going to get more people to make it go faster. It's just, we're going to use the resources we have when they become available to do it. That's the expectation of when the work's going to happen. And they're only going to do stuff when there's actual demand. So if there's no orders in the queue, they don't have to be there. They don't have to pay for them to sit around idly waiting for somebody to put in another order. So by seeing this and kind of the progress of things, one of the key things about task boards is it helps us to understand where there may be bottlenecks and maybe, a certain area, like maybe things aren't moving out of work in progress, or maybe the queue's growing, but stuff's not getting done. We can start to see those things in a very visual way. This stuff is continuously, in Kanban, stuff is continuously hitting the queue. So this is bonus slide number 2. And this is where I'm going to talk about how we can forecast an end date in a situation on a project where we don't know what the work is. And we can't know it up front. And that to me was like the biggest, most important thing I learned about Scrum, is how to make this happen. So it all starts with our list of needs, our backlog. And we're just going to keep it simple. This is like our entire project. This is the backlog. So the first thing we're going to do is have our experts in the work, our development team, provide estimates or story points for all of the user stories. And we're going to use our modified Fibonacci for that. I'm just going to go through and enter some numbers. So now we can do some math. It's not like objectively math, but it's math. So I can add up all the story points that the team has estimated for all of my user stories. And in our project, we have 48 story points in our backlog for the project. So to be able to tell the organization before we start anything, how long we think this project is going to take up front, we're going to start with the expected velocity or the team's guesstimate. To be able to create this guesstimate, we need to commit to the time box. Like how long are all of our sprints going to be? So let's say we've decided on a 2-week time box for each sprint. It's common. It's not the only length of sprint. It just is really common. So let's say for the team, based on 2-week time boxes, they believe, as a group, their experience, their expertise, that they can deliver 8 story points in a 2-week sprint. It's just their guesstimate. So math time. If we've got 48 total story points in the backlog and the team believes they can deliver 8 of them in every 2-week sprint, this tells us we're going to need 6 sprints to complete the backlog. And since each sprint is 2 weeks long, before we do anything on the project, we can tell the organization, we believe this project's going to take 12 weeks to complete the backlog. So the goal is to get all the way through the backlog. And then at the end of each sprint, we need to calculate current velocity. So we track how many story points the team has actually delivered in our sprints. And let's say we're at the end of sprint 3 and calculating current velocity again. So he said that current velocity is on average the number of story points the team is actually delivering in our time boxed sprints. So in total, the team has delivered 18 story points over 3 sprints, which means we have a current velocity of 6 story points per 2-week sprint. That is how many story points they are actually delivering in 2-week sprints. So to be able to forecast from here, the first thing we need to understand is, what do we think is going to happen for the rest of the project? Like, how is the team going to do work? Like, how efficiently are they going to do work? Could be a number of things, like maybe, in the next iteration, we expect for whatever reason, we're going to get more story points done, but then we're going to get back to the current velocity, or maybe we expect current velocity is going to jump a couple of story points in the next iteration, and then, we're going to use that to factor it. But more commonly, let's just say we expect our current velocity is going to be the velocity, because nothing is expected to change on the project. So we expect this is going to be the velocity that we achieve for the rest of the project. So we believe for the rest of the sprints, we're going to deliver 6 story points per sprint. So team's already done 18 of them. It leaves us 30 story points. So math again, we've got 30 story points, and the team believes they can deliver 6 of them in each time box iteration. This tells us we're going to need 5 more sprints to complete the backlog. And since each sprint is 2 weeks long, you can tell the organization at this point, we're going to need 10 more weeks to complete the backlog. And since now we're going to need more sprints, we're going to need to add a couple of sprints here. Because we'll need 5 more. We've already done the 3. We need to do 5 more. Now, since we're already at the end of sprint 3, we're already 6 weeks into this adventure, and we're going to need 10 more weeks to complete it, we tell the organization, now we think at the end of sprint 3, it's actually going to take us 16 weeks overall to deliver the backlog. That is how we can forecast an end date. So the last thing that I want to point out here, I want to talk about this guy. This is a user story that the team gave the maximum story points. Like, this is going to be the hardest thing we have to do, the most complex, labor intensive thing we're going to have to do on this project. So big, there's no way we would have been able to deliver it in a time box in a 2-week sprint. And the goal is not to start to create something in a sprint and then continue it on in the next sprint. The goal is to intentionally get it done and deliver it in the sprint. So we're only going to take on things that we can deliver in a sprint. And of course, like now, it's even worse if you consider current velocity. So what we're going to do to resolve this, and we should have done this, we would have done this based on expected velocity. You know, it's kind of the double check. Whoa, we can't do that one. Can't do it in a time boxed sprint based on expected velocity. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this user story, and we're just going to call her user story A. And we're going to have the team consider user story A and start to break it down into less complex needs that will ultimately, when completed, satisfy this very complex need. So we're going to make it a little simplified. So let's say they came up with user story A1, user story A2, user story A3. And they believe once we've satisfied these 3 needs, they will have satisfied this very complex need. So we're just going to simplify it. Removing complexity can be by there's a name for it. Sorry, it's not coming to mind with me. It can be addressed by doing it in chunks. And the chunks would be less complex. So we then have the team create estimates, story points for each of these user stories, which does confirm we can deliver these less complex user stories. We have the ability to deliver them fully in a time box sprint. And we're just at the top of this, you know, at the start of the sprint, the team's just going to look at what's in the list of what's important. They're going to grab from it anything that would add up to 6 story points, you know, based on their priority, based on their value. So technically, there was no way we could have, you know, based on these estimates that the team's just coming up with based on their experience. Conceptually, you know, we know we can't satisfy this very complex user story in a time box sprint, but if we do these 3, we could, because these are so much less complex. So user story A is really an epic that we had to break down to less complex components. Now, my piece of advice for you about this, because there are going to be some parts of tests at PM training that kind of challenge your ability to do this. My advice is look at this more from the 5,000-foot view. So instead of thinking there's a special way this needs to happen, and I got to think of all these details I'm not familiar with, just take the step back, you know, take a deep breath, take a step back, look at it, kind of blurry, right? And just use your logic. So if I've done this much work so far, and I have this much left to do with the assumptions of how efficiently I'm going to do that, I can figure out when it's going to end. So everything isn't like an absolute thing that you need to, like, it's not an absolute process that you must, you know, practice to be successful on this test. This doesn't fight logic. So think your logic. It's a logic problem. So if you've delivered, you know, if you have this many and you've delivered this much, and then coming up, you're going to maybe deliver more or less, you know, how does that all factor out to ultimately what it's going to take to finish it all? So any questions about this? Okay. Charles, are you typing or are you talking? Let me do this.
I'm talking. I was just
Okay.
wondering where, you know, I've skimmed through the Agile Practice Guide. I've read thoroughly through 1 through 4. I don't recall seeing any of this. Did I miss something, or is it in there, or is this just on the slides, or what?
This particular slide is the culmination of all of those little parts and pieces we've talked about up to this point, put together in a practical way.
Right, but just in total, all this, I mean, these are honestly very familiar to me. I've been in sprints doing these for a while, but I haven't seen this material in writing in any of the materials I've looked at so far.
Well, I did mention that we're not going cover to cover through the Agile practice guide. So you can't really align this back to what you read, although conceptually those things will be helpful for you to understand Agile. Remember, my goal here was kind of get you accustomed to how PMI looks at Agile when we're talking about like how they would in a practical way do projects, with their good practice. So yeah, you're not going to see a one-to-one alignment to the practice guide, but this is stuff that's relevant to the test.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So that's where the live sessions are so important because we talk about things, even the PMI materials, which we're just going to start talking a little bit about homework. And I'm not going to talk about homework going forward. It's just today's kind of a special case. So after our class today, your online test is a focus area test for Agile Foundation. And remember, you don't need to pass it. Just need 30% or better to say you actually tried to do it. Give it the good old college try, with whatever that means. And then your reading, your pre-read. For the pre-read, you're going to start going into the PMI materials. And often with the PMI materials, like what you're going to read are the actual like PDF of the presentation I'm going to be showing you on Tuesday, starting on Tuesday. But I'm going to be layering things in, like things outside of it that, just tips and tricks and things that we know that have been relevant to the test for years, and other concepts, and explaining things in a different way to help everybody understand what you're reading in those lessons. So you don't read these to teach yourself about the lesson. You need to be warmed up to it so I can layer more things in. Because if the first time you're doing it, the first time you're seeing it is during the presentation, like on Tuesday when we're doing the live session, it's going to be harder to keep up with all of the things. So get familiar with it by reading it, and then we'll go through it. So in the PMI materials, you have to go through lesson 2 in its entirety, and then there are sections in lesson 3 that you're going to need to read. So I've labeled them out in the PIM box. Like I said, we're going to start reading the guide. You need to read through the stakeholder performance domain, because part of what we're going to talk about on Tuesday has to do with stakeholders. So I kind of warmed up to that. So ultimately, we're going to be reading through, we're going to be going through PMI's lessons 2 through 8. They have a 1 and a 9. We just have our own presentations for those. So we're going to start with lesson 2. We're going to be concluding it with lesson 8. So you need to go get these materials. And since they're PMI materials, you're going to find them at pmi.org. There is a course that you don't have access to yet, but there's a course there at PMI. So to be able to access that course, you're going to need to go through some steps. And conceptually, what's happening? We start at PM training. And PM training has actually purchased a license key for you to access the PMI course, their PMP, their authorized PMP exam prep course. So we have this license key that you're never going to see because all this stuff happens in the background. So there are steps you need to take to get that license key. There are like these background electronic handoffs to get it to PMI. So you can then access your course. So once you've accessed it, the first time you go to PMI to get to it again. And that's where you're going to find all of the PMI materials. So to get instructions on doing this, you go to PM training. And in the instructor class materials, there's a folder labeled PMI materials. And in there is a presentation for accessing it the first time. That you must go through. Because again, that electronic handoff needs to happen in the background. So there are some specific steps. So there is a presentation that I'm about to show you about the step-by-step you need to do to successfully access your course at PMI. There's also lessons 2 through 4. We've put them there in case of extreme technical difficulty. Like if you're not able to, if you go through the instructions and you're not able to access it, you got to go through the instructions again. It's like 99% of the time because you missed a step somewhere. So you want to follow all the steps that I'm about to show you in a presentation that you also have access to. So you can use it as, a step-by-step. And then I want to, time allowing, I want to go out there and show you kind of what to expect at PMI once you've gone through all these steps that start at PM training. Now, we put lessons 2 through 4 out there just in case it is legitimately a technical difficulty that you're having, in which case you'd have to reach out to our service team, our PMP classes at PM training to do the triage of it. You don't want to go right to PMI because their volunteers have no idea what you're talking about. So like our team has been triaging this for a really long time. So they're going to be able to help you. And if they can't, they'll bring in PMI. But if you're having these extreme technical difficulties, we've put enough of their materials to get us through next week. But you are going to need to access that course at PMI to get to lessons 5 through 8. It is an absolute mandatory thing that you access the PMI materials. You must do that. So to be able to do that, let me show you the presentation. Really important to kind of keep an eye on the different steps because there are some things that are totally intuitive and some things that are not intuitive that I'm going to need to explain for you. Okay. So this is the presentation you can find in the folder for the PMI materials. The key is you got to activate that license first. The license you're never going to see, that's got to go from PM training to PMI. So we log into PM training, we go into my live PMP class, and then it opens in pre-class. Then we're going to click on during class. So all this information is during class, or it's relevant to as the class progresses. And you're going to scroll all the way to the bottom of the page to find the gold button that says something like request access to PMI course materials or something like that. It has different words. But I showed it to you in our tour of PM training. It's just at the bottom of the during class page, you click the gold button. Then when you do that, 2 things happen. One thing is they send you an email and nobody cares. It's also going to change. It's going to change on the screen. We don't have to worry about this part because really to get to the course, once you have accessed it for the first time, it's now open at PMI. You just go there to get it. What's key here is clicking on the button that ideally says PMI Partner Platform. I'm not sure. If I do this, I can never do it again. So I've just kind of held off. I've not clicked the orange. I did it the first time, or the gold button. I did it the first time and then the edition changed and everything went back. But anyway, so you're going to see this. You're going to click this link because this is going to grab that license key and it's going to start it on its way to PMI. First thing you're going to see is a window that asks you to enter an email address. This is not intuitive. What you're going to enter here is the email address you are using to log in to PM training. Because the login or the email address you're using at PMI may be different. So you want to make sure it can associate those 2 things. So you're going to put the email address you're using to log into PM training in there, and you're going to click add email. Then it's going to come up and ask you, do you already have a login for PMI? And if you do, you hit yes, and it'll take you to the login page. If you don't, you click no, you don't have it, and it brings up the registration page. Some recommendations here. Don't use these other programs to log in. Because if you lose access to one of those programs, for no fault of your own, like Facebook is notorious for that, then you can't get into PMI. So use a personal email address because not your work email address, because your PMP is forever, your work may just be temporary, right? On the bigger, better things. So use a personal email. Now, if you've already created this using your current work email, you can still go into your profile and enter in your personal email so it starts to associate those things. But you're going to create your login and password specifically for PMI. And then you hit register now, and it's going to ask you to log in. Or you skip that step if you already have a login and you're just going to come here and use your login. Once you've logged in, it's going to ask if you want to accept the invitation to PM training. And yes, of course, you're going to want to do that. And then it's going to do a second step of verification. It does this every time you log in. It will also probably do it when if you're registering for the first time, you may have to go through a second step of verification to, register. So you may have to do it twice if you're registering for the first time. But it tells you where it sent that code. So you'll get the code. Again, this is very common if you do a lot of, second step verification. Then it takes you to the PMI partner platform. And here you're going to see the online course that has something to do with PMP exam prep. You click on the box that says Get Course. Then it's going to ask you to confirm and proceed. Like, do you really want to access this course? And yes, you do. You want to do that. So to finally activate your course in a partner platform, it then goes to Start Course. So you'll have to click on that. And now the course is going to be available in PMI's LMS, their learning management system. So to find it, once you've accessed it, you would log into PMI, you go to, so it looks completely different now. They changed the LMS a few months ago, not really relevant to you. Once you're in there, once you're in the course, it opens up before your session begins, and you can click on any of the other areas to expand them, or you can just, do the arrows. So to find the course materials, you're going to click on course materials, and you want to go to current version, because this is the current materials that we're using for the test that started last week. Now in the course materials, you're going to see the handouts for lessons 1 through 9. Again, we don't use 1 or 9. So you want to probably go out there and you can download these, like the one time you go in there, you can download them all to a private drive. They are just a PDF of the presentation I am going to be showing you on, I'm going to be showing to you on Tuesday. It also has the exam content outline, which you can also find on the PMP page, some mastery builder questions, so more questions to use later, a glossary that we will discuss in our final session, what you're going to do with that, so don't have to worry about it now, and the student workbook. And all the student workbook is these days is all of the learner handouts smooshed together and made printable with 3 slides on each page with a place to do some notes. It's like 300 pages long. There's literally like 1,000 slides we've got to get through. So we are chock full of material as we go forward. So you can use the workbook if you want, or you can just use each of the, print them a certain way, whatever. I leave that up to you. It's just like a lot of paper. I have my own business. I don't want to pay for that much paper. And then you're not going to see this anymore, but it will be something like this, but it's not going to look like this. So what we're going to do is take a quick tour of what it looks like at PMI. So give me a moment to queue it up and share my screen. So I'm going to show you what it looks like for me. And my course is very similar to yours. Mine's just an instructor where I get the PowerPoint presentations. It's really the big difference between them. So it's going to look a lot like what you're going to see. So here I've just gone to pmi.org. I'm going to log in with my 20-year-old login. It's probably 21 now. It's legal to drink. Anywho, so once I'm in, I'm going to go to my drop down, get my name up at the top. PMI changes their website all the time, and they never warn you. So it's kind of an adventure. Every time you come out here, is it going to be the same? Is it going to be different? But I can always find what I'm looking for, so that at least they're doing it in a relatively intuitive way to find things. So instead of looking for my courses, like it says on the other thing, you're going to go to learning. So I'm just going to click on learning. And for some reason, it still opens me up in the dashboard, but and it tells, things about me. So I can scroll down to find the learning part, or I can just click on learning and go to my courses. And um, I've registered for a bunch of free courses as a PMI member. I get all this free stuff. So you're not necessarily going to see all of this, but this is how it looks now. And you're going to see this, something that is titled like this. Could be the PMI authorized PMP exam prep student. I don't exactly know what you're going to see on your side, but this is how it's showing up on my side. To start the course, you now click on start course. Again, I don't think any of this is like not intuitive. So when I log into the course, like I said, it opens up in the before your sessions start area, which has the course overview and stuff about PMP, whatever. You're going to want to go to the course materials, click on current version. What you're going to see at the top, because the other stuff is like instructor based, but you're going to see learner handout lesson 1 down to lesson 9. The ECO, we put a copy of it. If you haven't gotten it yet, you can download a copy of it from here. But again, you can find it on the PMP page now, the current exam content outline. And then these other things that I mentioned. Spotlight videos is something I'm going to point to, like encourage you to watch some of these videos as we're going through the presentations, like as part of your homework if you want to do it. It's just totally optional. But at the end, I'm just going to remind you that you got to get through all the Spotlight videos. Lots of great basic information. They're very short. They're all less than like 5 minutes. And some of them we're actually going to view during the presentations. It covers a lot of different topics. What you're going to see at the bottom says next steps, and there's a couple things there. One of them is like a 10-question knowledge check. And at the end of our program and our final session, I'll probably just remind you to go and do that. PMI said something about it being mandatory, but we're not convinced that that's the case, but it could eventually be someday. So go ahead and do it. It's 10 questions. You can take it as many times as you need to pass it. So they don't make it difficult for you to get through that. And then there's a survey. And always encourage people to do the surveys. Whenever you get an option for a survey, do a survey. This whole thing gets better based on your experience. So your experience is invaluable to PMI and PM training as well. So always be asking for feedback. So any questions? Carl, oops, didn't mean to do that, but Carl, let me open your line.
So let me get this clear. So when you went to the first site to get the, like I'm looking at the links on the side where it says, put my glasses on real quick. It says exam content mastery builder. Where is the lesson 2 to the lesson 1 to lesson? Oh, I see it right here. Okay, boom. So once you do that, then I thought but you can get the lessons right here on the PMI page. You don't have to necessarily, once you activate it from the PM training, you don't have to go back to the PM training once you activate it on the PMI site, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
I was afraid you were going to go in the opposite direction, but no, that is absolutely it.
Okay. So once you read those different lessons, I think lesson 2 to 4 and 5 to 8, then you're saying
no,
okay,
stop.
Okay.
No. I was just articulating that we put 2 to 4 at PM training just in case, so you could keep up next week with the homework to prepare for the sessions next week. But we don't provide them all, and you don't do them in that way. So in the homework page, you're going to read lesson 2, you're going to read parts of lesson 3 and the stakeholder performance domain in the PMBOK. That's prepping for Tuesday.
Gotcha. Okay.
And then on Tuesday, there's stuff to read lesson 3 and parts of lesson 4, because they all will kind of the lessons will start to roll into other sessions. So yeah, you're not doing them in bulk 2 to 4, 5 to 8. That was just saying 2 to 4 we provided there, but you must access the course here to get 5 to 8, and you're going to need 5 to 8.
But once that, okay, so I know you were saying about printing it out. If I don't print it out, I could always come back to look at the hand just from my computer. I don't have to print them out to read them, correct? Because you said there's
absolutely.
a lot. Okay.
Yeah. I just know a
Okay.
lot of people like to take notes, and I don't encourage copious note taking while we're doing the live sessions. Like, it's better to do that when you're watching a recording because you can pause stuff and take notes.
Right.
Um, I'm a paper person, so I say print out, but some people are like, but I don't want to print it. It's like, well, then don't print it. If electronic works great for you, just do that. Use what you need.
Okay. And last question. I know the guy asked a question earlier about the agile, about what you was going over with the sprints. I can always, because it's not in the book, in the reading, because I didn't read it also. I mean, I didn't come across that also, but I can always go back to the video or today's class session and go over what you spoke about today.
Yes, and you
Okay.
will do that as part of your continued studies, right? Where you're going to have to get through all of this material a couple more times. And that means viewing all of the recordings and doing all of the readings. You're just going to replay this entire thing with recordings rather than the live sessions. So it's
Gotcha.
self-paced.
So it could all sync together and give
Yeah,
it.
and you
Okay.
will, and you're going to have to see things at least 3 times for it to really fit there. Um, Harold, your hand was up. I know people are starting to drop. And if you have to be someplace like immediately, you're free to go. I'm answering questions here.
I actually answered my own question while
Oh, excellent.
scrolling through what he was doing. So I found my answer. Thank you.
No problem. No problem, because I did absolutely nothing to help you. So any other questions before we go? I want to help. I'm compelled to help. Alrighty. So I don't see any hands. So I'm going to believe that means nobody has any more questions. But of course, if one comes up in 5 minutes, send me an email. So let me just say, have a great weekend, everybody. And we'll see you back on Tuesday. We're going to start in on those PMI materials. So bye, everybody.